Welcome to the For the Youth, by the Youth podcast. My name is Brian Sudrain, and before we dive in, let's take a moment to thank our amazing sponsor, Florida Power and Light, for making this podcast possible. Their commitment for empowering the community and supporting the dreams of the youth is truly admirable. But now, let's get to the meat of the subject. Our guest today is Walker Douglas.
Hey,
He is
Brian.
at Yeah, hello. And he's at Douglas Property and Development. He is also the board chair of the Junior Chamber of Commerce. So, Walker, welcome to the For the Youth by the Youth podcast, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, man. Honored.
So now we'll jump in to the speaker overview. But before that, let's introduce our co-host, Greg Lose. Hey, Greg.
Hey, Brian. Great to be here. Walker, awesome to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, man. Thanks, Greg.
You're welcome.
So now that everyone knows each other and everyone listening knows who we are, let's jump into Walker's background. So first, a little bit of a personal question. How old are you?
Gosh, Brian, you're not supposed to ask. 30 years old.
My excuse is I ask it to everyone. So everyone's on the same line. And birthplace, where were you born?
I was born in Orlando, 1994.
Nice. And then profession of your parents.
My dad, I share the profession that my dad has, which he started out as a real estate broker and kind of merged into a developer, which a lot of real estate brokers do, especially on the land side. And my mom, for years, had a cupcake catering business where she made she catered like these little mini cupcakes and we lived at this time we lived in like a real I don't know, like a wedding type town where people would come and do their weddings in the summer, and she'd get all these brides and they come by the house, and I got exposed to a lot of bridezillas as a young lad, and ultimately the business folded as a result of the difficulty of the clientele. So those are the parents.
Okay. And also, what university did you go to and for what degree?
I went to two schools. I went to a school called Westmont College in Santa Barbara, California for economics. And then I did a semester and a half at University of Maine studying agriculture. I had on a hair, I wanted to go become a farmer. And so I studied sustainable agriculture for a little bit in Maine.
So, Walker, talk to us about, what was your first job?
The first big boy job, you might call it, after college was with a startup called Rare Form. If you guys want to look them up, we had a Shark Tank episode, like the actual ABC TV show. And what we were doing was we were taking billboards. So this is my California days. So a billboard is like a 14 by 40 foot, typically sheet of vinyl. So it's this thing that gets printed out, and it's really durable material because it's got to sit on the side of the highway for like a month or two usually. And on the side of the 101 with the smog and like all the nasty chemicals and whatever happens in LA on freeways, hitting that stuff all the time. And so one of my buddies said, hey, he called up one of the ad companies. He's like, what do you guys do with these big sheets of vinyl when you're done? They're like, well, we have to pay to send them to a landfill. And he's like, oh, great. Just we'll let's try something. Send them to me and we'll make surfboard bags out of them. Because surfboard bags are sometimes like 10 feet long. So it's really cool. You get like a little picture kind of, you might get like the bottom third of a Mercedes-Benz logo, which we were not supposed to be selling, but we were a small company at the time. So a couple of those slipped through the cracks. But that was really cool. And that was my first, I was driving all over California, going to surf shops, setting up sales meetings and surfing my brains out on the way on the road. I'd plan my sales trips around where the waves were good. But this was like summer of 2016 until 2017. And I realized as I'm doing that, the writing was on the wall that retail is failing. And these store owners had been around for years, some of them decades. Their businesses were failing. People would come in and they'd try something. They'd like go shop around the surf shop. They'd go try something on. And then they'd be looking on the internet, be like, I can get it for like $12 cheaper on Amazon or something. And then they go back home and they'd order it. And so at the time, I'm realizing I don't know how much longevity there is in this business. So that's when I transitioned back to Florida and real estate with my old man, was the fall of that year, 2016.
So, talk to us about if you didn't have your current career in real estate, which career would you choose?
Do you guys watch Yellowstone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, everybody, isn't that what every dude says? Yeah, I'd be trying to be a rancher. Like last time I talked to you, Brian, I said potato farmer, and I'm not going to deviate from that. I romanticize the life of the ag person, and I think I have a good handle on it too, because everybody says, and I've been exposed to that industry for a long time, and everybody says, yeah, I mean, you feed it, you never really make a buck, but that's not a whole lot different than the land development business either. So I think I'm
Mm.
prepared for it mentally.
When do
Brian,
you,
go ahead. Yep.
when do you think you're gonna make the transition to?
Once I get that
Potato
big
farmer.
deal, Brian, once the big deal comes in, then I'm going off the grid. You'll never see me again.
Good.
So Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you. Walker kind of shared his career path, so why don't you take it from here?
Yeah, sure. So, what is your biggest career accomplishment from your 30 years of age on this planet?
I don't. I know we're talking careers. I don't think about things in terms of like careers. They just feel like, big wins. Because I think, and it's important to think for you, Brian, and in our audience to think of things in terms of careers, because that's the feedback that you get, right? And like that's what goes on the resumes. This career milestone, this career milestone. Development's different because it's like no one's taking notes. I mean, we're a mom and pop shop. And if I were to go apply to, some Wall Street business or some real estate investment trust, yeah, there are milestones that it would put on there, like a successful rezoning, or closing X millions of dollars of sales in a year, or this and that. But it's funny because I really don't keep track of that kind of stuff, and the mentality there has been guided by. So I told you I was born in Orlando. And I spent a lot of my childhood in New England. So I was a Miami Dolphins fan in enemy territory. And
Mm.
watching, like, under a microscope, how the Patriots just won every year. They just kept winning Super Bowls. They never had the Super Bowl big blowout celebration party like the Dolphins would have if they had won the Super Bowl. So in my mind, I don't even really keep track of the big wins, to be honest with you, because I don't celebrate them. It's just you. And it's Brian, I see you with this mindset too. It's you're just on to the next thing. If you focus too much on the big win in the rear view, you kind of end up kind of steering the wrong direction and maybe going a little bit slower than you would otherwise.
Yeah, that's true. You gotta keep hungry. Do you have a good like career anecdote, like a turning point in your career where you realize, oh, okay, this is kind of made you change your mindset?
Yes, that's a really good question, man. And it's probably not the most politically correct answer, but um, without getting too into the
This,
weeds on development and what we do, Greg probably knows. Um, this was my first rezoning, second or third rezoning of a property, and it's very controversial where I do business to rezone anything. But if you look at the history of America and what's made America, one of the things that's made us great and at least separates us from every empire to precede us is this thing called property rights. If you have an idea about something you want to do on your property, if you want to put a business there, then you get to put a business there, and the government will defend that right to the hilt. Somebody goes and tries to burn down your business, you're toast. That's it. So I rezoned a piece of property that was approved for like all these controversial uses, like a bus station, like motels and stuff that people didn't want right there. I rezoned it to self-storage. A woman in a neighboring subdivision sued the city over approving that, and named me in the lawsuit. Dude, I was like, I don't know, I was like 24. I'd barely been doing this for like a couple of years. I'm like, I'm getting sued already for this type of stuff. And it was fraudulent. The lady lied on the lawsuit about how big the property was, lied about all sorts of stuff. It got tossed out on summary judgment, but it took 6 months to get there. So that's when, prior to that happening, Brian, I didn't have a whole lot of fire. My motivation was, it was just like, let's just get through this day and get these tasks on my to-do list done. Now it's like, there's a little bit of chip on the shoulder now. And I understand that woe is me, the developer, but we are carrying the torch for property rights, right? This was a landowner who wanted to make something happen on their property and contribute to the tax base in a new way that previously was vacant land. And you have somebody down the street saying, well, I don't want people to park their boats or RVs in a secured, out of view storage area. So that was kind of the turning point right there for me.
so talk to us about, challenges How do you overcome challenges? Is there a story that kind of puts all of that together for you? I mean, that's a big part of it. You know, kids and students watching this podcast are going to be like, they've got a lot of challenges coming their way. Obviously, right? They're getting ready to graduate high school, go into college. Um, Talk to them about how you overcome challenges that you find in your personal and professional life.
I'm going to answer the question vicariously through Brian because I've seen him face a lot of challenges with the junior chamber. And I think I won't put words in your mouth, Brian, but I think something that we share is that we believe in what we're doing. And when you believe in your job, the challenges actually become fuel and they make you more motivated and maybe more dangerous and more competitive. So they suck in the moment. Like when you're going through it and it's stressful and you're not sleeping and you're not eating, that's terrible. But then give it time heals pretty much everything. And if you look back at that stuff, it's amazing. All these cliches that you grow up hearing, like, oh, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You're so tired of hearing them, especially when you're in college and especially our audience. But there are moments in your career and your life when they like become real and you're like, oh, I get it now. I get that. I get those stupid idioms that I heard my whole life. But yeah, it
Yeah.
helps to believe to the people that if you don't believe in what you're doing, I don't know how you deal with the challenges. Hopefully, I don't know if it's a job challenge, hopefully the money is enough of a motivation. But for me, it's the belief in what I'm doing that gets me through it.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
say for me, like to kind of hinting at what Walker is talking about. I think compared to my peers, sometimes I have more time to kind of reflect and say, okay, I got hit really bad on this one, and I still came back from it. So now when I get another challenge, I can kind of overcome it more easily because I can kind of take a step back more easily than rather take it like square on the face. So yeah, I totally agree with Walker that the more you face it, the better. And then the more you kind of understand that whole process, the more you'll be like okay with it.
Yeah.
So I think now I would say, where are you in your career path? And do you think you've reached the top, or is there still room to grow?
Again, that's one of those things where we're just like, if you were talking to like somebody in like the banking industry where it's very defined or something like that, I would be able to give you a better answer. We're just a mom and pop. People think our company's a lot bigger than it is. It's just my old man and me, and sometimes mom runs the books. So like to me, I don't know what the top is, but I'm at a point where am I in my career? I'm at a point where I'm competent enough at 30 to take on the projects that we were taking on. And I had no idea what I was doing when I was 22 years old. So I can go out there and talk to the landowners, get the DRI without getting the alphabet soup, the land entitlement, the zoning, the land use, and all that, the stuff that adds value. So I know how to add value in my position, and once you get to that point, it's really freeing because you realize like if I were at a bigger company and you never know what happens. Even if you're IBM or something, there's layoffs and this and that. So it's really nice to get to that point to say, well, okay, I could leave this company and have something to add value and start my own firm and maybe even become more successful. That's sort of where I feel like I've gotten to at this point. But it's a lot of patience from the company that you work with. They've got to be able to take a chance on some 22-year-old that knows nothing about it and is going to have to figure it out and make a bunch of goof ups on the way. So realizing that those goof ups make you, they've made me where I am today. So I'm prepared to take on these big projects because of the goof ups. So when you go through them and you feel like, dang, I got to quit that. I can't believe I blew that. I'm so embarrassed that happened. Like, well, it's not going to happen again, is it?
You hope not, but Walker Douglas is our special guest on this edition of the For the Youth, by the Youth podcast, presented by Florida Power and Light and the Junior Chamber of Commerce. More with our conversation with Walker Douglas in just a moment.
Here in Florida, every name tells a story. Just saying Ian, Nicole, or Wilma brings about strong memories. But then there's Shane, Clyde, and Robert. Together they have more than 60 years of storm experience. They stand with an FPL team of thousands, ready to respond. So as the next storm approaches, just know, our job isn't finished until everyone's lights are back on. Get ready at fpl.com/storm.
Welcome back to the For the Youth, by the Youth podcast presented by Florida Power and Light. I'm Brian Studrain, president of the Junior Chamber of Commerce, and we're back with our guest, Walker Douglas, from developer at Douglas PD and board chair of the JCC. Welcome back.
Yes.
So now we're going to join and go into the agree-disagree game. And first big question is, throughout my career, I have become more risk-oriented. Do you disagree or agree?
Agree. And as I said before the break, I'm a lot more, that's only come with confidence, right? And with the failures and when you know where the bodies are buried, usually in a deal, you can kind of see around the corner. And so you become more risk tolerant because you know you can handle the risk and you know what boogeymen are potentially out there. So yeah, definitely more risk oriented.
Okay, awesome. And
Yep.
do you think, Greg, can you relate to that in that sense?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Walker. If I were to say more or less risk oriented, I would say more at this point. I'm 44, so still, and it's kind of like Walker said, the more knowledge that you have, you become more aware of the risks, and then you can sit there and say, hey, is this something that I can handle or not? And you got to be real with yourself about it. So, to me, I still think I'm more risk oriented. I just launched my own business after all, so yeah, I'm definitely in that spot.
Okay, next one is, a college degree is essential for a successful career.
No,
Why?
very, I'm very, I'm very bearish on the 4-year liberal arts degree. Particularly, I mean, Brian, you're, undergrad law, you know what you're doing. If you're going to go get a 4-year liberal arts degree and get a business degree, it's not what it used to be. It's not what our parents, actually, most kids watching this, it's not what your grandparents got if they had gone to college. It's what you're getting now is professors who are full-time professors teaching you about business. It is inherently like self-defeating because they're not in business, most of them. The best ones usually are the adjuncts. So is it? No, it's not required for a successful career. Kids underestimate how much of a risk businesses are willing to take on them in high school. And this is the pitch that I give at the career fairs is, look, figure it out now. If you as a high school student go talk, especially as like middle school, because we were doing the middle school career fair, you don't have to be, you don't have to be the most articulate or interesting person. You just have to ask adults with jobs that you're interested in lots of questions. And even if you're not interested in them, pretend that you are, get good at pretending that you're interested. And that's really all it takes. Because all the stuff that I learned in college, I haven't used one bit of it. The stuff that I used the most, spreadsheets, I didn't get any in college, maybe one class, but yeah, don't do it, especially if you can't afford it or can't get a full ride.
Yeah, my experience was much different. I didn't go to college until I was 26. So I was on the path that Walker would talked about, which is, I'm going to go, I'm going to develop my skills. I got a career in radio for 10 years based on doing that. It was the career in radio and the subject matter that I was talking about that made me feel like I had to go and get a degree. So I went to school for 6 years, graduated with my master's in business administration at 32. So, to me, my answer, if you asked me before then, would have been no, because look what I did with radio and X, Y, and Z. But I felt like the college degree was something that I needed to have on a checklist to prove to people that I knew what I was doing, and that's definitely the wrong reason to go. The good news for me is that when I finally went to college in my mid 20s and into my early 30s, that was the time where learning those things actually meant the most. So I really got a lot of value out of my college degree. I used it every single day. What I learned in the business schools. But to Walker's point, I don't think it is essential to a successful career. I mean, you could, decide that you want to be the most knowledgeable person in any subject. And if you're putting in the time and effort and, learning about that and practicing it, you really don't need a college degree, right? People become impressed by the fact that you didn't learn all of that stuff in college. So I don't think it is essential, but it may be depending on the career field. Brian, you're interested in the career in law and becoming an attorney. You can't do that without a college degree, right? I mean, so I think it really just depends on the career field that you're in.
Dude, Greg, you said something great. Yeah, like people are more impressed when you've shown that you're capable and haven't gone to college usually. And that's where I'm at
Yeah.
with it. Like some kid comes up to me, they're like 19, they're like, dude, I got a car detailing business or something. I'm like, I don't care that you don't know how to do a spreadsheet. Like we'll get you at least in a paid internship or something and get you exposed to the industry.
Yep.
Yeah, I think to bounce off of what both of you guys said, a lot of it is who you're getting taught by and how you're able to receive that information. I totally agree with Walker's point that kind of like adjuncts in my program at Nova, they in the law program, they have a huge amount of adjuncts or law professors that were like practicing attorneys in like the last like 2, 3, 4 years. So they still have that kind of a lot of business experience and a lot of law experience. And so kind of being able to just make class more like a chat between you and a professional is kind of the best dynamic, because then it's more fun, honestly, and it's more loosely structured than the regular like, oh, this is the lecture, etc., etc. There still needs to be some of that, but I think taking advantage of their personal knowledge and tying it back to their examples, I think if our audience can take one thing away from this conversation, is definitely that you should engage your professors to go in that direction because you'll get more out of it. But anyways, I think the next question and next statement is a strong work ethic is the most crucial factor in achieving career goals, surpassing talent and intelligence. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, talent and intelligence amplify where you can get, but if you have both, how many? Everybody knows the kids in high school that had all the talent, but just didn't spend it in the right ways, right? And they're usually like, I don't know, they usually end up going kind of not the best direction. But if you don't have the work ethic, what's going to rein that in and actually turn it into something productive and valuable?
Yeah, I would say that I would agree with that. I mean, that's how I built my whole career, is having a strong work ethic. You know, I don't know what business person I heard this from, you know, 15, 20 years ago when I heard it. It might have been I don't know. I don't even know who it was. But the point being that they made in this was, you know, people work 8 hours a day. That's the usual deal. So if you are willing to put in the additional time when other people are not working, you're automatically advancing faster than they are. And so that is kind of how I've gone about handling my career. And it's like Walker said, look, you can have all the talent and intelligence in the world, but if you're not willing to show up to the job on time, or you're not willing to put in the effort, or you're not willing to do the extra what it takes, you're really not going to stand out. I think people would look at you differently. They would say, wow, this person is so smart and talented. They just can't figure out putting in the work. And that's the most important part of the whole thing, you know? So I think I would agree with that statement as well.
Yeah, I think you can take a lot of like sports, like the most successful people in sports, like any sport, like Brady, Kobe Bryant, Cristiano Ronaldo, like they're all about like, work ethic. So I think translating that to just yourself, kind of how you evolved, is like that's at least what I tried to do a little bit. And I think it's the best way to go, because at the end of the day, talent can only get you so far. Yeah. Okay, now we're gonna move to some agree disagree statements, more specifically targeted towards the real estate market. So first one is developers should be required to include renewable energy solutions such as solar panels in every new housing project. Agree or disagree?
Who's going to pay for it?
That's a good question.
Okay,
Government.
well, the developer, okay, let's just say it costs $1,000 or something for the install. I don't really know solar panels that well. Maybe they don't, maybe it doesn't cost anything. Say it costs X amount of dollars. Well, the developer is going to pay for that. Well, the developers just got to pass that cost along to the homeowner at the end of the day, right? Because the developers got their margin and it's set right here, and you just went like that to it. So the developer is going to do that. So should it be developers are required to put in solar, or homeowners are required? And California came out with this policy years ago, and it just all it did was make houses more expensive.
And Greg, do you have any take on that statement, or?
Well, yeah, I do actually. I mean, so to answer Walker's question, I had solar panels put on my house to the tune of $36,000 for the solar array and everything. And so I think I think that is something that the individual people should know, because there's tens of thousands of dollars in cost in it, and what that could do to a mortgage over time. So it may seem idealistic, like, yeah, why isn't there solar everywhere? Well, the reason is because of how much it costs. The technology is getting better, but that's a decision that the consumer should make, not be required by government, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's
Good
fair.
question.
And okay, next one is developers hold the most responsibility for solving Florida's affordable housing crisis.
What do you think, Greg?
No, I think that's actually the government. Part of what you learn, and Walker could speak to this, in droves, is developers, people who build neighborhoods, they are subject to a lot of government regulations. Those regulations tend to result in the cost of the product, in this situation, housing. So my answer would be the government.
I agree with that, and I will modify it in my own way to say that it is developers' responsibility to get the public policy right. Right, we got to go fight at Tallahassee or fight at the local level. So, like, what Florida's affordable housing crisis. Why is there a crisis? Okay, well, if you look in where I do business, the minimum single-family home, minimum house square footage is 1,200 square feet. That might not mean a lot to a lot of kids watching this, but you need to occupy as a student maybe 300 square feet. When you graduate, 400 square feet. That dude, Brian, where you are in South Florida, 400 square foot apartments, like those rents are up there, man.
Crazy.
Okay. So how come we can't build a house that's 850 square feet, 900 square feet? There's clearly a market for it, and they'd clearly be able to afford it more than a 1,200 square foot house. So therein lies the problem: is it's bad public policy. It's cities that require every single family home to have a garage. Dude, you couldn't fill a garage up with all of your possessions if you tried, man. But it's a mandate, and so that's where, Greg, you're exactly right. All this, there's so much dead weight loss on affordability because of stupid regulation.
Yeah, fair enough. Um, Next question is, smart cities are tech-enabled housing developments are more of a luxury than a necessity for Florida's future. Agree or disagree?
As I've said, I aspire to be a potato farmer. So I've toured Lake Nona, which is, like, if you don't know, Lake Nona is Central Florida, this massive master plan community where, like, everything is very tech integrated to the health system. And if you pee in the toilet, then it, like, does a urinalysis and tells you need more, like, potassium or something. And, like, that's when we talk about a smart city, like, that's what we're talking about. I don't know, man. I've been to some European cities that would be called dumb cities, but they've been around for like 1,000 years, and people revere those places a lot more than we do, a place that you can get around in a driverless taxi and get your urinalysis done after drinking coffee.
Greg, any thoughts? You're muted.
I would say that it's the future. People want the gigabit internet coming into their, fiber optic this. Wi-Fi is like a necessity now these days. So I think these are wants, not needs. To Walker's point, when you go visit Europe, it's just like, wow, this church took 1,500 years to build, and it's still here 3,000 years later. Whatever like that, and it's not based on tech. And you got to think of a future, like what happens if you know, we don't have the energy to power these technologies. So I think it's more of a luxury than a necessity. I mean, I don't know if students watching this have learned about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the pyramid and everything, where at the very top, it says, hey, you got to have a roof over your head and a dry place to sleep, and then after that come the other things like food and water and clothing and, so I think those smart city things, they're good. It's the future. It's certainly part of what people want, but they don't necessarily need it. So to me, I would say it's a luxury.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think we need a like analysis on when we go to the bathroom every time. I don't think that's
Well,
necessarily.
the older you get, Brian, you might disagree with that, but I'm not there yet.
You're speaking for someone else, like a friend, right?
This
Yeah,
is
that's right.
the for the youth, by the youth
That's right. That's right.
So yeah, and then actually for the youth, the next topic is very important. It's remote work will permanently shift development trends away from the urban areas towards suburban and rural regions in Florida and even all over the place.
Greg, you're probably better on this than I am.
Yeah, I mean,
It's not completely, but it is it's happening. It's happening all over the country, right?
yeah, and I think the word in the question, remote work will permanently shift development trends. I mean, we don't know. Like that's the thing. Trends always change. Like right now, people can use the internet and they're out of the office and they're just as productive, presumably. And so people have the option to live where they want to live, and that's why we see some of the growth that's happening in Florida. Right, people are moving away from the cold and the places that they don't want to live because they can work from anywhere. So right now, yeah, it certainly seems like that is the trend that's happening. But will it be a permanent one? I'm not sold on that. I don't know.
It depends on how many people's neighbors have loud dogs. I think if the trend reverses, it'll be a result of that.
That's fair. I mean I feel like the sentiment is that especially for international work or even national work, companies are less kind of adamant to pay for those costs of travel as well. So it's so much easier to do like a Zoom meeting with someone, like if it's an international company, like someone in France and someone in the US, and then US with the different time zone, like East Coast, West Coast. It's so much easier to just calculate that and do a Zoom meeting than just make everyone travel to the same place unless it's something big like a conference or something like that. So I think they're like economically speaking for lots of companies it makes sense, but obviously the in-person impact will never be very rarely be replicated by online. So like I feel it's a balance. So the next and last subject is real estate development offers one of the most accessible career paths for young people interested in shaping their communities. Agree or disagree?
That's interesting, man. It's hard to get into. It's really hard. And it's not so if we're talking a small town, if we're talking about like Madison, Florida, it's up on I-10. There's no real estate developer there. There's nobody developing stuff. There's nobody doing communities. It's an ag town with a little cute, adorable little historic downtown. So how does a kid up there get into land development? They probably don't. The way that they do it is they save up all their money, they buy a piece of property and they improve it. They add value to it. So it's a really hard career. There's no defined career path. I mean, you can always join like a larger REIT, a real estate investment trust. It does manage development and all that. But what's going to happen is you're going to get sort of pigeonholed into one task. You're going to be the finance guy or the deck, or you're the project manager, or you're just the vertical construction manager, or you're the permitting manager. Doing sort of what we do at our little company in this little town, it's very difficult to find unless you do it yourself, unless you figure it out yourself, which I've seen people do. I've seen college kids find a deal down in Volusia County, put a couple of bucks down, finance it to the hilt, which probably wasn't smart, but eventually turned a profit. So you've just got to, the best way to become a developer is to get either exposure and competency in construction, so vertical construction, site work. So that's the horizontal construction, the clearing, the filling, the grading, the paving, and all that. So get good on a track hoe, or approach it from the white collar side of things and get good on finance, and get good in real estate. So there's unfortunately there's no secret recipe to get there. Most people get there by accident or by becoming a broker first and then realizing like, hey, in order for me to make more money, I have to have some actual value add instead of just selling property. I'm gonna have to actually figure out how to improve this property, how to get it entitled for a use that's higher and more valuable than it currently is. So can you do it locally? Yeah. If you want to do it locally and you're in Palm Coast, you call our company, Douglas Property and Development. We always need help. We're always giving internships and getting kids involved. So find a company like us, go find the signs that are on the sites that are getting cleared and call those companies and see if they'll, take an internship.
Yeah. Greg, do you have any thoughts on the real estate development career path?
That's more of Walker's world. I mean, I know the construction world is easy to get into, but because it's one of those things that we talked about earlier, where you just have to have a strong work ethic and show up and do stuff. So I would take Walker's thoughts on this one for sure.
I got
Yeah.
one more
So
thing that you kind of reminded me when you're talking construction, Greg, is if you want to get in real estate, definitely get good at building because there's a huge the supply chain is too large. Okay, there's too many hands that get in the cookie jar in real estate. If you're a builder, you build a house, that's incredible. You built a house. Somebody else then sells the house. Do they know how you built the house? Did they know how you permitted it? Do they know, that you went through all these inspections? They don't know anything about the house usually. And that's nothing on them. They just chose a different career path as a realtor. So if you could become a builder first, and then you take a real estate class and you're a realtor, you've just knocked out a whole segment of that supply chain and was taking up your margin, and you can be making twice as much on a deal. I don't know. I don't know what the cut is, but yeah, you can save a lot of time and effort that way.
Yeah,
all right, Walker, I want to. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brian.
no, no worries. I was just another pathway that's kind of maybe a little bit of a long reach, but I saw it in front of me happen. It was I was at a French Chamber of Commerce event meet and one of the people I was chatting with, I was discussing that he had just launched his development company and he was going to do large developments like airports and ports and large infrastructure like that. And his connections were actually through the banking and world and the hedge fund world. And so via those connections, he got in contact with us. So via the finance world could be another route. And actually in front of me, he like looked at his phone, smiled, and said, "I just raised my first 300 million." I was like, "Oh, congrats! That's pretty cool."
Yeah.
But yeah, so but that's also another pathway that the youth can take a look at.
Walker, we're talking to you about building communities. I mean, obviously, you're a land developer, which means you own land to build huge community assets on, neighborhoods on, stuff like that. Recently, mixed use developments have come in the news, and just to get everyone on understanding what we're talking about, a mixed use development is where there's commercial and residential on the same site. Usually the commercial is like on the ground floor and residential is on the upper floors. So I grew up in, Philadelphia, New Jersey, and mixed use development was a thing. There's people that lived on top of the corner store and stuff like that. It seems to be coming back into the trends, Walker. So we wanted to ask you about how mixed use developments are they redefining urban living by combining the residential and commercial and recreational spaces into one, or is it still kind of a niche thing? What are you seeing out there?
It's definitely niche, and there are certain um like median incomes, like population demographics that you need to hit for that to work. But dude, it's funny thinking about it because like yeah, you grew up in Philly until like I don't know the 50s. That was the norm. Like until
Right.
suburbanization of the country, it was like, what do you mean? They didn't even have a word for mixed use. It was just like, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
building. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah, obviously the commercial is here, and then the residential is above it. We built a building. That's what you do. And now it's like all these regulations that we put in place, all these zoning standards of like single family homes here, industrial here, commercial here, this here. That's what killed mixed use. And now we're finally, but the great irony of it all is we're not getting back to building mixed use by stripping away those regulations. We're making more regulations that say, well, we will allow mixed use in this zone right here. So it's sort of ridiculous, and it's a miracle that anybody can make a buck doing it to begin with because of all these heinous regulations that you have to navigate. We'll see. I mean, I'm not an expert in it. We're doing in town center a company is doing a mixed use building for the first. So Town Center is a project that we took over. It sat vacant for like 15 years. We got really lucky during COVID that everybody moved to Florida. And so we got a big population boom, big home value boom. And now this developer said, okay, there's enough money here for people to spend where I can actually make this, I can actually pencil this first floor retail, second, third, fourth floor residential. So that project sat there approved for for mixed use for 20 years, and we're just now getting it. So yeah, I mean, mixed use is always going to be around in cities and stuff, but it's popping into these suburban zones, and planners love it. So planners will incentivize it. They'll figure out ways, because that's the new gospel, urban planning gospel. So they'll figure out ways to make it happen, and maybe it's like the new big box thing where cities bent over backwards to subsidize these giant corporations to come in and destroy a bunch of jobs in main streets. Maybe that's what's going to happen to mixed use now. Who knows?
Yeah, and so I wanted to talk to you about, because this is the For the Youth, by the Youth podcast. So we're talking about young people, and you and I see the opposite of this all the time, right? When we go into City Hall, when we go to the county commission meetings, where they're talking about future development and what neighborhoods should look like and what your community should look like. Mostly we have senior citizens showing up there and making their voice heard. How can young people influence community building efforts through design, urban planning, or local leadership?
Dude, that's a great question. And I try to get at these career fairs, and anytime at the schools, I just try to get some actual boots on the ground data for, like, yeah, kids, what do you want? And it's always the simplest thing possible. It's always like a coffee shop, like we think we got to reinvent the wheel, and sometimes we
Right.
do. But how do we get the input is, like, honestly, dude, that's up to the business leaders in the community. So the junior chamber is working on kind of branching out with our career fair into other areas. And what that's going to result in is that's where that feedback is going to come from. If you can get developers and stakeholders at those career fairs and interfacing with the JCC, that's how you actually get the feedback of what do you students want. Like when we got into town, when we took over this project in 2017, the first thing I did was I went to City Hall, because the high school that Brian went to is right there in this project. There's nothing. It's like all this vacant land. There's like a weird movie theater. There's nothing there. And I'm like, how sad is it that these kids, they have all this opportunity for cool stuff, but the high school's right here, they could go anywhere after school, all this vacant land, nothing's there. And so I put together a curriculum where we took kids to Lake Nona and all over Florida to look at all these redevelopment and ground up development opportunities, and got their feedback. And the overwhelming feedback was like, we just want a coffee shop. It's like, and that bears out in the data, because they cross the street after school, and like there's like 100 kids at Wawa getting into fights and stuff every day. So a coffee shop, it's about getting a coffee shop with a kind of a little bit of a calmer vibe than the Wawa. I think that's what contributes to all the physical fighting after school. But yeah, the feedback comes from the businesses generally connecting with the students, I think.
Okay. We've got some tips for the youth Brian's going to ask you about. So Brian, take it away.
Yeah, of course. So the first one is, what valuable lessons have you learned throughout your career that you wish you knew when you started out?
Don't assume that adults are smarter than you or wiser than you because they're older than you. And Brian, I know you know this one. They're usually not. Be respectful.
Yeah.
But if you get a no from an adult, the way you've grown up is, you assume that they know everything. It's rarely the case that they know everything, if ever. So don't let a no from an adult ever discourage you.
Yeah. Greg, care to chime in on that? Go.
Valuable lessons that I wish I knew when I was starting out. I think, I don't know, that's a hard one. To me, I just think education, and that's kind of the message that I deliver to students is, I'm thinking about my own son. I have two kids going through school, right? One of them's 13. He doesn't want to go to school, right? He's trying to get out of going to school today, and it's a Friday. So, but it's the education thing, and that's what I tell him. I'm like, look, you have to understand that no matter what it is you do in life, whether it's construction or being a lawyer or working at a fast food restaurant, it's always about education. And that sounds pretty crazy, but when the fast food restaurant comes out with a new chicken sandwich, you're going to have to learn how to make it. Now that's education on this level versus, if you're an attorney, you got to know the latest laws and the changes that happen every year. So I just think it's, wrapping your mind around always continually learning, because it's something that never goes away.
That's true. Continual learning is actually a requirement by the bar, so
Yeah.
it's a real thing. Okay, second question is, what role did mentorship or guidance play in your career development? And do you know how to pay it forward by do you now know now pay it forward by mentoring others? Like, do you do it yourself?
Um, I I got more out of, I guess, all right, mentorship. Look, man, I got more out of my family being in the development industry in 2008 during the Great Recession and watching what happened there than I have by any mentor or by any positive lesson. I get so much more from the negative lessons than the positive ones. I would say I've got this local cat who's 80 years old. His name is Toby Tobin, and he kind of took me under his wing and let me co-host his radio show for years. And what I learned from Toby is find a niche. Just get like is dialed in on something that nobody else knows about. And his was Flagler County real estate values. And so like this guy who, he retired to Palm Coast and he's got D.R. Horton and these massive builders coming to him like, hey, Toby, like, can you find me this? Can you find me this deal? Can are our numbers accurate? Can you look at this spreadsheet? And just find something that is a little bit interesting to you. And what Toby taught me is like the work will come.
Yeah. I would say for me, I didn't do mentorship or guidance at all. I kind of just figured it out as I went along. At times, I wish I had the mentorship thing, but it always felt weird to me going up to somebody and saying, "Can you be my mentor?" And that just wasn't my style. So I just kind of watched people and learned from watching them and all of
That's great. Getting called weird because I do that a lot. So
Shots fired.
okay, can you share some valuable networking tips and that have helped you out throughout your career? Networking is obviously huge, especially nowadays when there's such competition and you're trying to get an edge. And you're pretty good at networking, so we thought it would be a great question for you.
I don't know if I'm good at networking. I just am curious. I just ask I don't care what industry you're in. We'll have a great conversation and I'll be very interested in what you have to say. And that's all it really takes. Like Brian, like when you're at, we had these local events that we go to and Brian would be at, and like Brian's asking people questions. And it's like, especially if you're a younger kid and you're like, oh, you sell mortgages. Like, what does that entail? The person's gonna be surprised. If you're in college, you want to have a little bit of background so you can have some sort of conversation, a little back and forth, and impress people. But you don't have. Nobody expects you as the youth to have any answers. So what you have to do is ask questions to get the answers right. And if you do have some answers, if you come into a conversation with a developer and you know about some public policy that's going to hurt development or hinder it, or you know about some local projects, then yeah, bring that and show them that you know that, because it shows that you care about it and you're going to be a good, probably developer someday. Um, what else do we have? What other tips for networking? I don't know. Don't be boring, be interesting.
Yeah,
Great
I would
tip.
say get out of your comfort zone. So many people, when it comes to networking and what we're talking about, is you're meeting other people and you're trying to find out if there's a connection for you to have some sort of business or personal relationship. And that requires you being willing to put yourself aside and say, look, I may not feel comfortable doing this, but this is what needs to be done. I need to meet people. And I talk to my son about that all the time. He's in in middle school, and it's like, hey, go out. You can't just sit inside and be in a bubble. I mean, you can in some industries, but mostly you're going to need to work with other people. You're going to need to meet other people, and so you got to get out there, get outside of your comfort zone, and get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, and if you wait till you're 35 to do that and you go up to somebody, you're like, hey, can I shadow you for it? Like, you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt. You can say stuff at like age 14, 15, 18, 20 and get away with it and be a doofus in front of somebody. And they'll be like, oh, that's sweet that they put in the effort. And, but if you wait too long, networking is not as easy.
Good
Yes.
point.
And then the next one is very important is how can young professionals build resilience to cope with the ups and downs of their career journey? Because there will be up and downs.
I don't know. It kind of just happens, doesn't it, Greg? I mean, you sort of have to. You either
Yeah,
build
my
resilience or you quit, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's you just it's just experience. I think you go through the whatever the learning experience is. There's a few times in my career where things happened that I thought were the absolute end of the world, and then you look back on it, years later, and you can't imagine it having worked out any differently. And so I just think you have to check yourself on the highs and the lows, and the lows are a heck of a lot harder. When you're running high, you got this big career victory or whatever happened in your life, and that's you think it's always going to be that way, and it's not. But you have to enjoy those wins, and just the same on the losses. When something really negative happens or something that you didn't plan on happening happens, you just can't get too down on yourself. You do have to learn from it. You do have to do an honest assessment of what went down. But I think that I don't know how to build resilience. It's just kind of going through the experience, to Walker's point.
Man, it's also too, we get bombarded with like, I was listening to Andrew Huberman the other day, and it's like the best indicator for like longevity is your level of stress throughout your life. And if you have low stress, you live the longest. And it's like, well, that's bogus, man. I don't know how you have a life without stress. It doesn't this is the first period in human history where anyone's ever had any expectation that you can go through life without having to be resilient or having to cope with, disasters. So it's just part of it. It's nothing different. If you if you can't figure out how to cope, then you're gonna have to find a different job. And then guess what? You're gonna have to figure out how to cope with that job too at some point. So just gotta put your head down and mash the gas.
Yeah. And what advice do you have for young professionals looking to stand out in a competitive job market, especially nowadays?
Um, Well, I'm thinking about you're sort of the template to me on this, Brian, because you can sort of talk to anybody. And I think it's because you have opinions and you're very well researched. So if you want to stand out in a competitive job market, maybe you're thinking like, okay, I'm going into a data-driven industry that doesn't require a lot of like extroversion. Okay, maybe I'm just going to sit behind a computer all day and do coding. So how do I stand out? Why do I need to stand out on a social level if that's all my job is, if I'm not interacting with a lot of people? Well, that job interviewer, let's just pretend it's just a typical job interview. That job interviewer interviews tons of people for that position, and they're all probably pretty similar personality types because that's a very distinct, I don't know, personality that gets into numbers like that. You want to be the one that stands out socially. All right. So, like, at the end of the day, if you can show an interviewer or a CEO or somebody in the industry you want to be in that that you know what you're talking about, you've got a good work ethic, but that you can you're sociable because this person is going to be interacting with you all the time. And something that kids, especially kids, underestimate is if you show me that you can have an intelligent conversation and a back and forth, it shows me that you're coachable. If I can't get any insight into your personality when we're talking, I don't know if you're coachable or not. And I've hired a lot of interns that didn't really have, didn't put in the social effort, and it ended up, okay, not the most coachable kids. And like, shame on me for not realizing that. We still take chances on kids. But if you want to know what separates you from the other kids, and I think because Gen Z, because you guys got locked in and got robbed of like a school experience during COVID for years, if you can be a little bit more socially adept, just a little bit more than the rest of them, you're going to have a huge leg up over everybody else.
And I would say know your strengths and weaknesses. I mean, that's a big part. You got to do like a self-assessment and say, how what am I strong on? What am I not strong on? The dogs, I'm strong on the dogs, and but the other stuff, and I
Passion.
think that's good. Yeah, I mean, well, you gotta have a inventory of your skills and know what's good and what's working and what's not.
I think I agree with Greg, especially that the knowing yourself and knowing where you're weak on, maybe knowing where to improve, and maybe get out of your comfort zone. I think that's really important. Like for me, Even though public speaking isn't super natural, like I feel like through practice, like I'm better at it. So like the more you get in contact with something, for example, like public speaking, the more you'll feel confident. So I feel like some skills that you're weak on, maybe if you have a like true about yourself and you know that's maybe a weaker area that you can work on, then it'll give you a leg up compared to people who are more like delusional about themselves realistically. And then how do you handle and learn from failures and rejections in your career? How can young professionals turn them into opportunities?
Yeah, I think we hit that earlier a little bit. We talked about lawsuits and stuff like that, and not sleeping and not eating, and then getting through it, and then let that be your motivator. It's especially helpful, man, when you get, and Brian, you take shots when you're taking arrows from people, whether they're in your industry and they're jealous, or they're outside your industry and they're whatever it is. That's the what's better motivation than that, right?
Yeah, I would say that, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, but the failures and rejections in your career, you can't let them define you. Turning them into opportunities, I think, is really tough, because I'm thinking about, hey, an instance where I lost my job and that felt like the end of the world. And I went for months without work, trying to figure out like where, what am I going to do? And so you can't let the lows get too low. But you do have to do an honest assessment. And my thing would be like not to make excuses. That's a big thing these days. Just own it. If you make a mistake, like people make mistakes, own it, learn from it, try to move forward. And that would be my recommendation.
Yeah. And to end it off, how do you balance work and personal life, and what tips can you offer and maintain a healthy work-life balance? I know Walker, you're big on that.
This is a terrible trio to be talking about work-life balance. Is there somebody we can call
Yeah, can we
to
phone a friend,
that would
Brian?
have
Do you
better
have any friends?
feedback on how to achieve work-life balance? I told you last time, Brian, I was like, you asked me what success was for me. I was like, I just want to go fishing. And and those occasions are becoming more and more rare. So I'm becoming less and less successful, I guess, by my own definition.
Yeah, I'm not so good at the work-life balance stuff either. It's like we talked about with the work ethic earlier. Putting the time in when other people aren't putting time in and stuff like that. You just can't get carried away with it. You got to go on vacations. You got to take days off. You got to take nights off. But that goes against what everything we just said earlier. But the worst case scenario is if you burn out. You're not good to anybody else if you're not mentally and physically sharp. If you're not able to do your job because you're too tired or whatever that is, so there's a balance to it. I don't claim to have figured it out, but I do know that you do have to take times off. You do have to take vacations. You got to kind of enjoy the downtime and definitely get out of the house. And for me, it would be into nature. That's what I've discovered later in life is being outside, whether it's the beach or going on a walk or just being outside is a big part of de-stressing.
I think there's a great writer named David Sedaris, who's a short story guy, he's an essayist, and he talks about when you're 22 years old, you're never going to look better. You're never going to feel better. It's the best time. It's the best time in your life for you to be dirt poor living in your car. And like, if that's what it takes to get the job, you're never more prepared for it. So like, do it then. Do it when you're 20, 22. And to Greg's point, what I was doing when I had this job right out of college, selling surfboard bags, I was busting my butt, and I'd get a surf in at 6 in the morning, and then I'd go to the surf and carve out people. Unfortunately, the word hobby is the word hobby. And it's a terrible word for something that's like so important to people's health and mental health and everything. So no matter what you're doing, if there's zero work-life balance, you at least have that thing, if it's surfing or golfing or whatever it is that you're working towards, that you treat yourself with at the end of the day. That you need that like positive motivation too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd say
good point.
personally, that you also do what you love. I think like you'll be less likely to burn out, as Greg said, if you love what you're doing, because you'll be able to put more hours and feel them less. Like if I do 1 hour of something that I hate, it'll feel like the whole day is shot. But if I do the whole day of something that I love, then I'll be like, wait, the day's already over. I want to do it again and again. So I think that's also helps in becoming less burnt out. But I do agree that going out and in nature and stuff also helps a lot.
That's a great point, Brian. I was trying to FedEx something yesterday and it took me like 3 hours and it ruined my whole day. The whole day. I'm still grumpy about it.
That's fair. Hopefully we don't get something from FedEx.
Yeah, exactly. It might not. It might. Anyway, hey Walker, we're getting to the end of the program here, so I want to ask you a couple more questions before we go, and I know Brian's going to jump in. Let's talk about the Junior Chamber itself, right? This is a 501c3 nonprofit designed to help middle and high school students, discover their careers, become more educated, to help them learn important life lessons. So, how did you get involved in the Junior Chamber?
I got involved by a local, it's a great story, a local leader. And I was involved with another kind of young professionals, but like 20 something, 30 somethings organization. He said, hey, there's this kid at FPC. There are whispers of a boy who wants to connect businesses with students. And he's been getting the door slammed in his face at every turn. And I said, that sounds great. Let's get him let's get him an organization. So Brian and I connected, and then Brian ran everything from there. I kind of made some intros, but all I did was facilitate introductions and relationships with some local stakeholders, and he completely took it and made it his own thing. And 5 years later, we're international.
Yeah, just like Pitbull.
Oh boy.
Oh, sorry.
Pitbull, Brian.
Been in South Florida for too long, man.
Yeah.
Probably.
All right, Brian, next question's on you. Go for it.
Yep. How's your experience with the Junior Chamber been, with no particular bias?
With no particular, but well, I am biased. Dude, it's been inspiring. So what I mentioned, the curriculum that I started, we just did one semester where we took kids all over Florida and showed them urban planning and development and got feedback on what they wanted for our project. I would have loved to have continued doing that. That program, it was a great teacher. I mean, couldn't have been a better teacher. That program ended up folding up a couple of years later. So I didn't even have that. I didn't have that relationship anymore to go through and get student feedback. But that's the best thing. Selfishly, the best thing that the Junior Chamber has done for me and will do for other developers that are in Junior Chamber towns is get feedback from the kids on what they want. Because what are we doing at the end of the day? We're developing for the future, right? If we're developing for things that are trendy right now to Gen X and boomers, that's going to be antiquated in the next 8 years. So get the feedback from the Junior Chamber kids. That's been the most valuable thing to me. Getting interns that actually add value. We're working on something. The JCC is working on something, sort of like mini internships, because in the development business, I don't have time or bandwidth to like put together a whole internship program and do a month and like give you your schedule and this. I have projects that I hate. There are certain things I just don't like to do. A lot of times administrative stuff, sometimes really fun research stuff that I don't have time for. But what JCC does is facilitate basically a project-based intern that can take over. It might only be a 5-hour project, but you can still pay the kid $100, a couple $100 to get it done on an internship basis. So to me, those are the two most valuable things that I've gotten out of the JCC.
And to build on that, how do you think the Junior Chamber should project, and what area should it go into in the future? As board chair, you have more of a voice than most.
I mean, I want to see this. What I've seen, the little petri dish that we have here is we can guide public policy. And you've got the law background, Brian. I've got the development background, but I've seen where the Junior Chamber kids, where their feedback has come into play. And I'll zoom out a little bit. Our company's mission in Palm Coast is to get kids who grew up in Palm Coast to want to continue to live in Palm Coast and raise their families there. The way that we get there is talking to you. So the direction that I want to see the Junior Chamber go is be able to implement that sort of feedback channel everywhere we go. If it's St. Johns County, if it's, the Panhandle, wherever it is. And I think if you can get in, the Junior Chamber has a great way of getting locked in with local chambers and local business leaders, and you can facilitate those interactions really quickly. And I think that's whether or not, that's where I want it to go. I think ultimately that's where it probably will go.
All right. Last question, Walker, before we wrap up. Why do you think students listening today should join the Junior Chamber of Commerce?
So they can get a job that they like and get paid a lot of money at. And if they don't get paid a lot of money at it, hopefully it's a job that they absolutely love and adore. I've seen, gosh, last spring we gave a scholarship to a student who his lifelong dream was to become a pilot. Now he's in flight school. We give all sorts of, and it's not, the kids that come to the junior chamber meetings and they get involved here are typically the top tier. So it really filters out the kids who are just showing up and are trying to get checked off the list. Like, yeah, I showed up. So we get a lot of really passionate kids. So if you're a business leader that's involved in the junior chamber, especially if you're a board member and you get to see Brian every couple of weeks at our board meetings, you get to know who the kids that really, really want it are. And if you're one of those kids, you'll do really well in the junior chamber. I'm sure you'll get some opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise get.
Yeah, and I would add probably the part about there's just so much. I mean, the financial literacy stuff, but even more than that, part of what the junior chamber takes pride in is listening to students and helping them, go down their pathway. It's not. And the other thing I think about is if you're a homeschool or a virtual student, you're missing out on so many opportunities that exist in school. So an organization like this could really be helpful to helping you get prepared for that next stage of life. So.
Awesome. Well, I want to say a big thank you for Walker for coming on and sharing some really good knowledge about his personal background and how he views things and kind of helping the youth get a good insight on how to move forward and especially in the development business and real estate business, but also in any other kind of career. So yeah, huge thank you, and always a huge thank you to Florida Power and Light for helping this podcast be a thing and help spread the different professionals experiences throughout the internet. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Walker. And thank you to everybody watching for joining us. Don't forget to check out the next edition of the For the Youth, by the Youth podcast. And remember to like and subscribe us on social media. And you can learn more about the Junior Chamber of Commerce online at jccflorida.com. Thanks again for joining us.